Welcome to a deep dive into the life of Mahatma Gandhi, the incredible events that led him to the Salt Satyagraha.
It's amazing to think he mobilized a nation with nonviolent resistance.
Right. And we're going to figure out how he did it.
It's a really fascinating journey to understand it. We're going to look at two books. One is focused specifically on the Salt Satyagraha itself, and the other is called The Story of Gandhi.
Oh, interesting.
It was written for children, but it actually offers some pretty valuable insights into his personal development.
So we're going to trace the evolution of Gandhi's philosophies and explore how they culminated in this pivotal moment in India's fight for independence.
Exactly.
I think this will be really eye-opening,
Yeah.
especially for people who are into social movements, leadership, or just intrigued by Indian history in general.
And what's really captivating is that Gandhi's path wasn't like a straight line. It was this constant interplay of ideas, actions, personal struggles, and global events.
Right. So many factors. Okay, let's rewind all the way back to the beginning. Gandhi's childhood in Porbandar. I think it's fascinating that even as a kid, he had this inherent sense of justice and a strong aversion to violence. The book talks about an anecdote about his childhood friend Ukani, a sweeper boy who, sadly, was considered untouchable by society at the time.
Right. It's a really powerful illustration of how societal norms can clash with individual morality.
Yes.
Gandhi just couldn't grasp the concept of untouchability. He saw Uka as a friend, a human being.
Yeah.
And he couldn't understand why their friendship was considered taboo.
It makes you wonder how something like that seed of questioning injustice, planted so early, could grow into a lifelong commitment to fighting inequality.
Right.
And it wasn't just personal experiences that shaped him. The book also mentions how deeply moved he was by stories from Hindu epics, like Shravana carrying his parents on a pilgrimage.
Oh, yeah. Those stories emphasizing selflessness and duty really resonated with him. He was always seeking moral examples and striving to embody those ideals himself.
It really says something about his character.
Definitely.
And the foundation on which his later activism was built.
For sure.
We can't forget about his arranged marriage to Kasturbai at the young age of 13, a practice that was very common in India at the time. It's fascinating how their relationship also evolved alongside Gandhi's journey, with Kasturbai eventually becoming a key participant in his movements.
Definitely. A major turning point in his life was his move to South Africa as a young lawyer. He probably anticipated a more comfortable life there, but instead, he was confronted with blatant discrimination.
It is striking to think that Gandhi, who had experienced some level of privilege in India, was suddenly subjected to prejudice based solely on the color of his skin. The book actually describes a jarring incident where he was thrown off a train just for refusing to remove his turban.
Wow, just imagine being humiliated like that, purely because of your attire. I think these repeated encounters with discrimination really ignited a fire in Gandhi, transforming him from a passive observer to a passionate advocate against injustice.
Yeah. It's ironic, isn't it? South Africa, intended as a simple career move, became the crucible where his activism was forged. He established the Natal Indian Congress, his first venture into organized resistance. What's fascinating, though, is that his views were complex even at this stage. During the Zulu Rebellion, he formed an ambulance corps to assist the British.
Yeah, this might seem contradictory, considering his fight for Indian rights. But at this point, Gandhi viewed the British Empire, despite its flaws, as a necessary structure for global progress. His focus was on India's advancement within the existing system, not yet on outright independence.
It seems like he was still grappling with the best way to bring about change. So how did he transition from forming ambulance corps to developing Satyagraha, his philosophy of nonviolent resistance?
Well, one key influence was John Ryan's book, Unto This Last.
Interesting.
You might be thinking. A book on economics. How does that relate to Satyagraha?
That was my initial thought, too. It seems a bit out of left field.
But it really challenged conventional economic thinking. It advocated for the dignity of all labor and the importance of community. And this really resonated with Gandhi. He started experimenting with these ideas at the Phoenix settlement, a community based on simple living and shared labor. It was sort of a prototype for his vision of a just society.
So he wasn't just theorizing, he was putting these principles into practice.
Exactly.
And that's a key aspect of his approach, this seamless blend of philosophy, social action, and personal transformation.
Right. That's what made Gandhi so compelling and influential. He wasn't just preaching, he was living his truth. But as his ideas were evolving, the discrimination in South Africa intensified, culminating in this 1906 ordinance. That forced Indians to register like criminals. They had to carry passes with their fingerprints.
Wow. It was essentially a system designed to control and dehumanize the Indian population.
Exactly. And it was this blatant injustice that gave birth to Satyagraha, not just as a concept, but as a force for action.
It really is. So, Gandhi called for peaceful defiance, leading people to burn their registration certificates and face mass arrests. But it wasn't just about protest, it was about challenging the very soul of the oppressive system.
Right. There's this powerful story in the book about Gandhi being attacked by a fellow Indian who disagreed with his nonviolent approach.
Oh, wow.
He was seriously injured, but he refused to press charges.
That's remarkable. It shows his unwavering commitment to nonviolence, even when facing personal harm. It also takes tremendous courage to stand by your principles when others, even those who share your goals, resort to violence.
And this dedication extended to his professional life as well. He actually gave up his law practice around this time. It was a powerful statement about his complete devotion to the cause.
Clearly, he was all in.
Yeah.
But his journey was far from over. What happens next? Does he stay in South Africa?
He returns to India in 1914. But instead of immediately diving into the independence movement, he spends a year traveling and absorbing the realities of his homeland.
It seems like a wise move. You can't effectively lead a movement if you don't understand the people and their struggles. What were his impressions of India at that time?
Well, he was really troubled by the poverty and social injustices he witnessed. He also found the Congress Party, the leading force for independence at the time, somewhat disconnected from the common people.
That probably didn't sit well with some of the Congress leaders.
You're absolutely right. He delivered this really scathing speech at the Banaras Hindu University, criticizing the extravagance of the elites and advocating for self-reliance.
Wow.
This bold stance created ripples, shocking some, while resonating with others.
Gandhi never shied away from speaking truth to power. So when did he launch his first major campaign in India?
His first major campaign was the Champaran Satyagraha in 1917, where he championed the rights of indigo farmers who were exploited by British landowners.
It seems like fighting for the underdog was a recurring theme in his life. And of course, he brought his Satyagraha tactics to the forefront.
Absolutely. The magistrate actually ordered him to leave Champaran. But true to his principles, he refused. Gandhi was prepared to be arrested, and his unwavering stance ultimately forced the authorities to back down.
I'm noticing a pattern here. Gandhi consistently transformed legal battles into moral victories.
He was a master at leveraging public opinion and symbolism. You see, his victories often lay in exposing the authorities' actions as unreasonable and unjust.
So Champaran was a significant success. What did he do next in his quest for justice in India?
Well, his activism kind of gained momentum. He led other campaigns, like the Ahmedabad mill strike and the Keta Satyagraha. These efforts highlighted his growing influence and his dedication to social justice, especially for those who were most vulnerable.
Yeah, it sounds like he was really hitting his stride, becoming a force to be reckoned with. But I imagine maintaining his nonviolent approach couldn't have been easy, especially with the constant pushback from the British, trying to suppress his movements.
You're right. Gandhi faced mounting challenges, especially during World War I. Imagine being in his position, supporting India's loyalty to the British Empire, but at the same time, pushing for its rights and freedoms.
It does seem like a bit of a tightrope walk, advocating for both cooperation and resistance. How did he reconcile those two seemingly contradictory stances?
Well, it was a delicate balancing act, and not everyone understood or agreed with his approach. It must have been a confusing time for many of his followers, trying to navigate those complexities.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Then, as the war ended, the situation in India became even more volatile. With the passing of the Rowlatt Act in 1919, these were a series of laws that essentially allowed imprisonment without trial and other really harsh measures.
Right. It was a blatant attack on civil liberties. And Gandhi responded by calling for a nationwide hardle, a general strike as a form of protest. This was a pivotal moment. It was his first attempt at mass mobilization on such a large scale.
It was a massive movement. But unfortunately, it also resulted in outbreaks of violence in some areas. It must have been heartbreaking for Gandhi, considering his core principle of nonviolence.
It was a major setback. He realized that controlling the momentum of a mass movement and ensuring its adherence to nonviolence was incredibly difficult. He started questioning his strategies, wondering if he'd misjudged the people's readiness for satyagraha.
That raises a really important question. If even Gandhi, with his unwavering commitment to nonviolence, struggled to maintain it within a mass movement, is it truly achievable on such a scale?
It's a question that has haunted social movements throughout history. And as we'll see, it's a question that continued to plague Gandhi's efforts. But before we jump ahead, let's talk about the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, this horrific event that took place just as these questions about nonviolence were swirling.
Right. In 1919, British troops fired upon a crowd of unarmed civilians gathered in Jallianwala Bagh. It's a chilling reminder of the brutality of colonialism and the challenges of maintaining nonviolent resistance in the face of such oppression.
It was a turning point in many ways. The massacre fueled anti-British sentiment. It radicalized many Indians, pushing them toward more militant forms of resistance.
So how did Gandhi, the champion of nonviolence, respond to this horrific act?
He was deeply shaken by it, yet he remained steadfast in his commitment to peaceful methods. He urged restraint and continued to advocate for Satyagraha, believing that violence would only perpetuate the cycle of brutality.
It must have taken immense strength of character to hold on to those principles in the face of such tragedy. It seems like a defining moment for him, further solidifying his commitment to nonviolence as the only path to true liberation.
Absolutely. And, his unwavering stance inspired many, but it also led to disagreements within the movement. Some believed that a more forceful approach was needed to challenge the British Raj.
So how did Gandhi navigate these internal divisions while also strategizing against the British?
In the early 1920s, he launched the non-cooperation movement. So instead of directly confronting the British with force, he called for a strategic withdrawal of cooperation, a boycott of British goods and institutions.
That's an interesting approach. It seems like he was aiming to undermine British authority by essentially cutting off their resources and legitimacy. Did it work?
It was incredibly effective. It gained widespread support and momentum. It felt like India was on the verge of achieving self-rule. The British administration really started to feel the pressure.
But then, there was the incident at Chauri Chaura in 1922, where a mob of protesters killed some police officers. It seems like a stark contradiction to the principles of nonviolence that Gandhi so staunchly advocated.
The Chauri Chaura incident shook Gandhi to his core. It was a devastating blow to the movement and for Gandhi, a profound personal crisis. He saw it as a failure of his leadership and a sign that he had perhaps misjudged the people's readiness for nonviolent resistance.
So what did he do? How did he respond to this crisis of faith in his own methods?
In a controversial decision, he called off the non-cooperation movement. It was a moment of deep introspection for Gandhi, where he prioritized his principles over political expediency, even though it meant delaying the fight for independence.
Wow. Many of his supporters must have been furious, feeling like they were surrendering at a crucial moment.
They were. They saw it as a major setback, a loss of momentum. But for Gandhi, it was a necessary step back, a reaffirmation of his unwavering commitment to nonviolence, even when it seemed counterproductive.
It must have taken tremendous courage to stand by his principles. When everyone around him was urging him to compromise, the Chauri Chaura incident seems like a pivotal point, forcing him to confront the challenges of maintaining nonviolence in a mass movement.
It was, and it led to a period of reflection and reassessment for Gandhi. He was imprisoned for centuries.
No peace! No peace! No peace!
So what happened to him in 1924? No peace! Back into the independent movement?
He did, but he also shifted his focus towards social reform, working tirelessly to uplift the poorest and most marginalized communities in India, particularly the Dalits, who were considered untouchable under the caste system.
Always fighting for those most in need. It seems like his commitment to social justice was as strong as his desire for political independence.
Absolutely. He saw the two as intertwined, believing that true freedom couldn't exist without equality and justice for all. But the fight for independence was never far from his mind.
So when did the path towards the Salt Satyagraha begin to take shape?
Well, in 1928, the British government appointed a commission to study Indian conditions or recommend reforms. It was called the Simon Commission.
I remember learning about that in school. Wasn't the whole commission made up of British members?
Yeah.
With no Indian representation at all.
Exactly. Gandhi saw it as a blatant insult to the Indian people, a clear sign that the British weren't serious about granting them any real autonomy. He called for a boycott of the commission, and once again, the nation responded.
It seems like he had a knack for mobilizing people around symbolic issues. That resonated deeply with their sense of injustice.
He did. The arrival of the Simon Commission was met with protests and black flags wherever they went. The chant, "Simon, go back," became a rallying cry across the country.
It sounds like a powerful display of unity and defiance. So the British are facing this growing resistance, And then on top of that, the peasants of Bardoli decide to stage a tax revolt.
That's right, led by Vallabhbhai Patel, who would become a key figure in the independence movement. The Bardoli Satyagraha was a masterclass in nonviolent resistance.
I'm curious about the tactics they used in Bardoli. What made it so effective?
Well, the peasants refused to pay. These unfair taxes levied upon them. They stood their ground against government intimidation. And through their unwavering solidarity, they forced the British to negotiate a settlement.
It seems like Gandhi was incredibly skilled at turning these local struggles into national movements. He was inspiring people across India to take a stand, and the British were clearly feeling the pressure.
They were. And they tried to appease the unrest by dangling the prospect of dominion status. Similar to what Canada and Australia had achieved, it was an attempt to pacify the Indians without granting them full independence.
But that wasn't enough. Gandhi and the Indian National Congress wanted complete independence, the right to determine their own destiny.
Exactly. And that demand was formally articulated. At the Lahore Congress in December of 1929, it was a declaration that India would no longer settle for anything less than full freedom.
So the stage is set for a showdown. The British are clinging to power, while Gandhi and the Indian people are demanding independence. How does the Salt Satyagraha, this seemingly simple act of making salt, fit into this larger struggle?
Gandhi was a brilliant strategist. He knew he needed a powerful symbol, something that would resonate with every Indian and expose the injustices of British rule. And he found it in salt.
Salt, it seems like a surprisingly ordinary thing to spark a revolution.
Right. But Gandhi recognized that salt was a basic necessity, essential for life. Yet the British had imposed a hefty tax on it, making it a symbol of their control over even the most fundamental aspects of Indian life.
So by challenging the salt tax, he was actually challenging the entire system of British rule. It's a brilliant strategy, using something so commonplace to expose the deep inequalities of the system.
Exactly. He understood the power of symbolism and how it could unite people across social and economic divides. So to challenge the salt tax, he announced this march to the coastal village of Dandi, where he would publicly break the law by making salt from seawater.
A march to Dandi. How far was that?
Over 240 miles, and it was a journey that would take weeks. Keep in mind, Gandhi was in his 60s at this time.
Wow. This is no small feat. He was putting his own body on the line, making it clear that he was willing to endure hardship for the cause.
It was a carefully calculated act of civil disobedience, designed to mobilize public support and draw international attention to the Indian struggle.
So on March 12, 1930, he sets off with 78 volunteers. I imagine news of this march must have spread like wildfire.
It did. It was electrifying. As Gandhi and his followers passed through villages and towns, they were greeted by these cheering crowds, offering food, water, and encouragement. The march became the symbol of India's collective yearning for freedom.
Wow. Can you imagine the energy? The sense of hope? It must have felt like the whole nation was on the move with him. What was the British response? Did they try to stop the march?
Initially, they hesitated. They were afraid of making Gandhi a martyr. But as the march gained momentum, the pressure to act grew.
But Gandhi wasn't one to back down. Especially when he believed he was on the right side of history, he was determined to reach Dandi and make his stand.
And he did. On April 6, 1930, Gandhi and his followers arrived on the shores of Dandi. In a simple but powerful act of defiance, they picked up handfuls of salt, breaking the British salt law.
What a moment. I can only imagine the outrage from the British.
They were furious. They recognized that this seemingly insignificant act had immense symbolic power. It challenged their authority and control, and they couldn't let it go unpunished.
So the crackdown began.
Absolutely. Arrests, beatings, censorship, you name it. The British unleashed a wave of repression to try and regain control. But it was too late. The Salt Satyagraha had ignited a wildfire of resistance. That spread across India. People everywhere were making salt illegally, defying the British monopoly.
It's incredible how this one act, defying the salt tax, galvanized the entire nation. But the British weren't going to sit back and watch their authority crumble.
Right. They responded with brutality, arresting thousands of protesters, including key figures like Jawaharlal Nehru and even Gandhi's own son, Devdas.
Wow. They were really trying to crush the movement. Did they arrest Gandhi? He was their main target?
They did, on May 4th, 1930. But his imprisonment only fueled public outrage and intensified the movement. The British strategy backfired, turning Gandhi into a symbol of resistance, even behind bars.
It seems like every time they tried to silence him, it only amplified his message. Did the Salt Satyagraha achieve its immediate objective? Did the British repeal the salt tax?
Not immediately. But the movement brought the administration to a standstill. One particularly brutal event that captured global attention was the raid on the Dharasana salt works. A group of volunteers, led by Sarojini Naidu, a prominent poet and activist, marched to the salt works, determined to make salt, despite the heavy guard.
So they were met with force. Must have been a terrifying situation.
It was. The police, armed with steel-tipped lathis, brutally attacked the nonviolent volunteers. The scene was horrific. Newspapers around the world published photos of the brutal beatings. It further swayed international opinion against the British Raj.
It seems like this event, as horrific as it was, exposed the brutality of the British regime for the world to see. It really highlights how Gandhi's commitment to nonviolence was a powerful tool to expose the inherent violence of oppression.
It did. It forced the British to confront their own hypocrisy. Public pressure mounted, both in India and internationally. The British government was forced to recognize the strength of the movement and the need for a negotiated settlement.
So what happened next? Did they finally agree to talk to Gandhi?
Yes. The Viceroy, Lord Irwin, realized that continued repression would only escalate the situation. He decided to engage in dialogue with Gandhi, leading to the Gandhi-Irwin Pact in 1931.
What did the pact achieve? Was it a decisive victory for Gandhi and the movement?
It was a significant step forward. The pact secured the release of political prisoners and a temporary halt to civil disobedience. In return, Gandhi agreed to attend the Roundtable Conference in London to discuss India's future.
So a truce, but not a complete surrender. Seems like Gandhi was willing to negotiate, but not to compromise on the ultimate goal of complete independence.
Exactly. And while the Salt Satyagraha didn't lead to immediate independence, it was a turning point. It shifted the balance of power and forced the British to recognize the legitimacy of Indian demands and the strength of nonviolent resistance.
So what happened at the Roundtable Conference? Did Gandhi finally achieve a breakthrough for India's independence?
The conference, unfortunately, yielded limited results. The British were still reluctant to grant full independence, and there were deep divisions among the Indian delegates, particularly along religious lines, which the British often exploited to maintain control.
The persistent challenge of Hindu-Muslim tensions, a problem that plagued India throughout its struggle for freedom.
It was a major obstacle. The British were masters of the divide and rule strategy, often using these religious and social divisions to weaken the movement.
And Gandhi was a staunch advocate for Hindu-Muslim unity. He saw it as essential for India's progress and freedom, but it was an uphill battle, to say the least.
It was, and it was a struggle that continued to plague him. But despite these challenges, he returned to India, determined to continue the fight for freedom and justice.
So even though the Roundtable Conference didn't result in a concrete plan for independence, did it have any lasting impact?
It definitely raised the profile of the Indian struggle on the world stage, Gandhi used his time in England to garner support for the cause. He even met with the king. He visited textile factories in Lancashire, appealing directly to British workers who were suffering because of the boycott of British goods.
It sounds like he was a master at building bridges and understanding different perspectives. But back in India, the situation continued to deteriorate, didn't it?
Yes, it did. The British had resumed their repressive policies, and tensions were rising. Gandhi sensed the urgency of the moment, and he attempted to meet with the new viceroy, Lord Wellington, but he was denied. The door to negotiation seemed closed.
So how did he respond? Did he give up and let the movement fizzle out?
Never. He announced the resumption of civil disobedience, and in January of 1932, he was arrested and imprisoned once again.
It seems like the British just couldn't keep him locked up for long. He was too powerful a symbol, both inside and outside of prison.
You're absolutely right, but this time, his imprisonment took a dramatic turn. He embarked on a fast unto death, protesting a new British policy regarding the untouchables, or Dalits. The policy aimed to introduce separate electorates for Dalits, meaning they would vote only for representatives from their own community.
So instead of unifying the electorate, seems like the British, we're trying to further entrench the caste system. I imagine this was completely unacceptable to Gandhi.
Absolutely. He viewed it as a cynical attempt to divide the Indian people and weaken the independence movement. Gandhi was a lifelong champion of Dalit rights. He saw this as a moral outrage and was prepared to sacrifice his own life to oppose it.
So he's in prison, refusing food, putting his own life on the line. What was the reaction? Did anyone try to intervene?
Leaders from all sides, including Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, a prominent Dalit leader, rushed to negotiate a compromise to prevent Gandhi's death. After days of intense discussions, a compromise was reached, known as the Pune Pact. The British government agreed to modify its proposal, granting Dalits reserved seats within the general electorate, rather than separate electorates.
So it seems like even from prison, Gandhi was able to achieve a significant victory for social justice. He forced the British to reconsider a divisive policy and helped to unify Indians across caste lines.
It was a testament to his unwavering commitment to equality and his remarkable ability to use his moral authority to effect political change.
What happened after the Pune Pact? Did Gandhi continue to actively lead the independence movement?
He did, but his health had been weakened by the fast, and he recognized that a new generation of leaders, like Jawaharlal Nehru, was ready to take on more prominent roles.
It seems like a mark of a true leader, understanding when to step back and empower others.
It is. Gandhi continued to guide and inspire the movement, serving as its moral compass. But he shifted his focus to social reform and rural development, He believed true independence meant not just political freedom, but also economic and social upliftment for all Indians.
That's a powerful message. So as we conclude our deep dive into Gandhi's path to the Salt Satyagraha and beyond, what are some of the key takeaways from his incredible journey?
Gandhi's life was a testament to the power of truth, courage, and compassion. He showed the world that nonviolent resistance could be a force for change, capable of shaking empires and transforming societies.
He demonstrated the importance of living in accordance with your principles, even when it's challenging, and the power of leading by example.
His legacy continues to resonate today, reminding us that even in the face of immense adversity, one person's unwavering belief in justice can change the course of history.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the life of Mahatma Gandhi. We hope you've gained a deeper understanding of his journey and the events that led to the Salt Satyagraha.
Gandhi's story is one of continuous evolution, struggle, and unwavering commitment to his ideals. It's a story that has much to teach us about leadership, social change, and the power of nonviolent resistance.
We encourage you to continue exploring Gandhi's life and legacy. It's a journey filled with inspiring lessons and challenging questions that remain relevant even today.